Hello, welcome back to Bookshelves. My name's Shelby, and this is a cozy little corner on the internet where we talk about all things reading, writing, and otherwise bookish. Welcome to the winter 2026 quarterly wrap-up. I hope spring has sprung wherever you are in the world, and I thought this would be a good time, now that we are a full 3 months down, to check in and sort of wrap up all the books that I read in the first 3 months of the year. This will cover January, February, March of 2026, and during that time I read 16 books. That was about a quarter nonfiction and 3/4 fiction, with a little more than half of the books I read being on audio, which is definitely how I move through so many books in a month. About a third were physical print books that I own, and then another 13% or so were digital books that I rented from the library as well. We've got a good mix of genres in today's wrap-up, and all of the books that I read that I don't physically own come from a mix of sources. So most of them, 7 of them I think, are from the library. I also do quite a bit of reading through audiobooks on Spotify these days, and I do have an Everand account, so one of those books was through Everand as well. Okay, let's jump into it. I actually read 4 nonfiction books this quarter, which is pretty wild. I haven't been reading nonfiction at that pace in several years. I think the last time I was doing that, I had a different job where I read nonfiction on my lunch break because it was a way of keeping my brain turned on but not thinking about work. So I really was happy to find a real mix of like memoir, which I read quite a bit, and a sort of obscure historical nonfiction this quarter. And I have some really fun ones to share with you. So the first was a book that has been on my TBR, I think, since undergrad, like probably 2016, which I think is when this book was originally published. It's called Hood Feminism: Notes from the Women a Movement Forgot. And this is a book that really kind of re-centers and reframes feminism. It says, of course, feminism is an issue of gender equity, but we cannot imagine gender equity alone or in this sort of ivory tower abstract. To be engaged in feminism is to be worried about issues around economic security, around housing, around food insecurity, around gender-based violence. The idea is that nobody can live a free, liberated life if their fundamental needs aren't met. And the movement has really failed to engage with a lot of those cross-cutting issues around race and class and experiences of violence and of criminalization. So it was really powerful stuff. It reads like a book that was published in 2016. Like, it is very evocative of the first Trump administration era and kind of the way we talked about like social justice issues, if you will, at the time. But a lot of it still rings really true, eerily true even, now that we are living under Trump too. And I found that it was a really great way to start off the year and sort of center how I was thinking about these issues. The author is a Southside Chicagoan as well, and so I really enjoyed getting to hear her talk about communities that I know and hear so much about in my own day-to-day living in Chicago myself. And that added a really sort of nice, like, personal touch that made me feel a little bit more connected to the book than I might have otherwise. But I was glad that I finally picked it up. It was truly a decade old on the TBR, and it was worth waiting for, you know, and still bothering to pick up all these years later. These next 2 books are very clearly interrelated, and I think I got one of these recommendations, this next one, I'm pretty sure, from Kaylin over at the Redheaded Academic, Kaylin Applegrace. She's a historian, so I think that's why she was interested in this book. I am just a lover of all things spy and heist related, which is, I think, why it drew me in. It's called Book and Dagger: How Librarians and Scholars Became the Unlikely Spies of World War II, which, what a title. But it's incredible nonfiction because it reads like fiction. It is at times thrilling, at times devastating, at times like kind of absurd and funny. Like, the premise is sort of so unexpected. The idea that we mobilized all of these academics and turned them into spies, but we did. It's a history I really had no idea about until I picked up the book. It makes sense once you hear sort of the argument, right? Academics were some of the most nondescript people who had a good reason to be anywhere all over the world, to be in prestigious places with prestigious documents, looking at art, talking to important people. They were in all of the right circles, and had this very unassuming reason to be there. And I didn't really realize this, but we in the US did not have a super strong espionage infrastructure, I think is fair to say, until World War II. And so this was sort of the first iteration of what ultimately became the CIA. I thought this book was really compelling. It kept my interest the vast majority of the time, and there were truly stories in this book that I will never forget. The horrors of World War II are so vast and innumerable, it can be hard to remember that we have to imagine it quite so enormously, right? It's easy to sort of put it in a box and assume you understand all the fundamentals, but there were anecdotes in this book that were just devastating. And it was such a reminder, not only of how interesting the world of espionage is, but more importantly, a reminder of how important information is, and how information, language, art are ways that we form identity, and that identity is something that we strip from people when we dehumanize them. I thought the book did such a good job of both keeping you engaged from that sort of spy thriller perspective, and also really making you look at some of the horrible things that happened in the war that you might not have otherwise been exposed to. There were just fascinating stories in here too. I mean, things about Hollywood set designers creating entire fake battlefields and the cultivation of false information that kept forces of Axis powers split, that allowed us to, make real headway in the war. There was so much I didn't know, and I really enjoyed all that I learned and got to take from this book, so I highly recommend. And of course, one of the more fun things about picking up a really good, obscure nonfiction book is that it probably opens the door to a whole world of similar obscure nonfiction. And that's where this next book comes in, which is Lincoln's Lady Spy Master, the untold story of an abolitionist Southern belle that helped win the Civil War. Which is a mouthful. We gotta stop including all the subtitles in these nonfiction texts. But it's exactly what it sounds like. It follows this very wealthy Southern woman whose father was a slave holder, and she fiercely disagreed with his philosophy and the philosophy of all the people around her. So when he passed and his wealth came to her and her widowed mother, they made it their life's mission to just completely disrupt the slave system. When the Civil War broke out, they sort of took action as these rogue spy handlers. Nobody had hired them. They were not recruited. They just took on the work themselves. They started cultivating contacts, trying to find who in the Union Army could benefit from the information they had. They were kind of like an underground railroad for Union soldiers who were prisoners of war and helping them escape. It was unclear to me if the home was also part of the Underground Railroad. It does seem like many of the people who were formerly enslaved in her childhood home then did become parts of her spy ring too. And so kind of using their place in society to gather information. The presumption that they couldn't read was a great sort of cover for leaving them in rooms with documents that were important. And there were just so many fascinating pieces of this story that I had never really imagined or considered. And again, I learned a great deal about the Civil War from a perspective I never would have considered. So this was also a very solid read, and I would recommend to anybody who loves historical nonfiction, books about like espionage, anything about this period of time, specifically around the Civil War. The last of the nonfiction that I read this quarter was Who's Watching Shorty? Reclaiming Myself from the Shame of R. Kelly's Abuse. And this story was incredibly powerful, incredibly painful to read. This is an incredibly powerful survivor memoir from one of the earliest survivors of R. Kelly's abuse. If you followed any of the coverage about the extent of R. Kelly's abuse, you might be familiar with the fact that there were allegations against him, well documented, well before he was ultimately held accountable. There are early records of his marriage to 15-year-old Aaliyah in secret. And there was also a stolen, quote-unquote, sex tape that was replicated and sold on the streets of Chicago for years. That video is child pornography. And the young woman at the center of that video is Rashana Landfair, the author of this book. For years, she was anonymous in the court record, and she initially refuted that it was her in the video. But she decided to write this book to tell the story of how she was groomed and how she came to leave that relationship and to reclaim her own story. She does such an incredible job of zooming in and out of her childhood perspective. She tells you the logic that a 12-year-old goes through when an adult person starts to engage them in inappropriate behavior. And then she zooms out and she talks to us about that from her adult perspective. And I think it is just a remarkably executed story because it's absolutely her own story, but it is also the story of anyone who has experienced child sexual abuse. She so effectively talks about the strategies and the signs. And she does all of that with an incredible amount of grace for all of the adults in her life who at a minimum had an inkling that something was wrong, and in many cases outright knew what was happening and didn't protect her. The title of the book is actually explained in that first chapter. She opens with this idea of how there were so many adults looking at her, but no one was watching her. And I think that's such a powerful message. It is, I think, the hardest survivor memoir to get through that I have ever read. It is explicit. It is graphic. It is upsetting again and again, but it is also incredibly powerful, and it is reflective of an experience that so many people just like her had. So I think if you are in the right place and you can safely consume something like that, it is an incredibly powerful read and something that I would recommend widely, so long as it's something that you can kind of take on right now. I'm very glad to see that Rashana is like finally in a place where she can tell this story as her own. Because for years, as she chronicles, other people were telling other versions of this story on her behalf. So I hope that this book really reaches far and wide and gets her version of the events out there for the world to see. Okay, that's everything for nonfiction. Now we can go ahead and dive into the vast world of fiction that I read. Starting with fantasy, I read several fantasy books this quarter. The first of those were books 2 and 3 in the Gale Song series by Shauna Lawless. They were The Words of Prophets and Kings and The Land of the Living and the Dead. You guys, these books are some of my favorite books I've ever read, and if you have not already heard me or someone else on the internet rave about them, take this as your invitation to go pick them up immediately. These are, I think the pitch that was given to me that made me pick them up is that these are Irish Game of Thrones books. They are substantive historical fantasy. They are based on real people and real events in I don't know if it's considered medieval Ireland. It's like the 900s Ireland, at a time when the Irish Celts and the Nordic Vikings and the Christians were all kind of going head to head for power in Ireland over the many different kingdoms of Ireland. And not only is that like very human conflict happening on the surface, but there is this under conflict that Shauna Lawless weaves that brings in these two warring, dwindling races of like mythic beings in Ireland. And so the two main characters are each one member of this race or the other. And you see their sort of fight for survival and in amongst this larger conflict between the humans. And these books are insane. The first book was really, really well executed, but I could feel that we were building to something and that they weren't kind of at their peak yet. Book 2 was my favorite of the whole series, which is very hard to do, right? I mean, normally we talk about middle book syndrome, but the second book in this series, I think I gave like 6 out of 5 stars. Like one of the best books I've ever read. It delivered on everything that was set up and then some. And the third book was also phenomenal. It not only continued to deliver on like the very real stakes of the conflict, but it also was doing so much work to set up the second arc in this series, which is out in part right now. The first book, Daughter of the Other World, in like Gale Song 2, I think came out last year, and the second book comes out this year. So I'm really hopeful that I can kind of catch up on the series by the time that book 2 in arc 2 comes out this summer. I am begging you to go read these books. They are some of my favorite books I have ever picked up. They have political intrigue, incredible magic, war, romance. Like everybody has an interest and through line in these books that you can find, I'm sure of it. And the writing is absolutely phenomenal. I also read The Conductors, which I have summarized in my recent video all about my favorite Black heroines in fiction. So I won't talk about it too much here, but just to give you a quick once over, The Conductors is another book that has been on my TBR for ages and is a magical historical fiction story that follows a couple who are living, I think, in Philadelphia after the Civil War. And they live in a community of Black people who are all, you know, going through a lot of very real struggles that happened after slavery was ended and people were suddenly like sent out into the world with very varied resources. And there is a type of magic in the Black community known as celestial magic. It has to do with like drawing symbols that are like the constellations of stars in the sky. And then there's also magic in largely white communities that is like wand-based. It's more like sorcery. And so in our present day timeline, in this post-Civil War Philadelphia, there is a murder mystery afoot. And our couple are kind of serving as the detectives. But before the war, they were conductors on the Underground Railroad. And they brought many of their friends who they now live with in this modern timeline to freedom using their magic. And so we have almost like a 3-part story happening. There's this murder mystery in our contemporary timeline. And there is this like really interesting, like heroic, thrilling, terrifying narrative around their time as conductors. And then before that, in our main character's sort of youngest childhood years, we get the story of her being separated from her sister as she escaped enslavement herself. And so the thread through all of this is the search for her sister. And this book had so much heart as well as magic, and had an unexpectedly large amount of romance in it too, to be honest. It really had everything, and I highly recommend. I'm pretty sure this is a series with like 4 or 5 more books, so I'm very hopeful that I can pick up the sequel, if not several books in the series this year. Next is Among the Burning Flowers by Samantha Shannon. I have been so excited for this Roots of Chaos middle book. It's a prequel to Priory of the Orange Tree and a sequel to A Day of Fallen Night. But I've been so excited for it since it was announced, and it absolutely delivered. For anyone who's not familiar, Priory of the Orange Tree and the Roots of Chaos series by Samantha Shannon is this incredible collection of like high epic fantasy that has just such a richly imagined world that's very based around dragons and the different sort of like religious interpretations that came out of a really dramatic event in the sort of distant history of the civilization. There are fire mages and there are dragon riders and there are queendoms as well as kingdoms. Lots of sapphic love in these stories. They are masterpieces. I love them so much. They're also tomes. I think the two main novels in the series are each like 800 pages apiece. Among the Burning Flowers is a novella by the standards of the other books in this series. So I think that it was like 250 pages, maybe. But I absolutely loved it. And if you liked the other books in the series, you will absolutely like this too. And it's honestly the most approachable book in the series because it is so short relative to everything else. But this book, it follows a story that is sort of referenced in Priory, which is the fall of the kingdom of Iskalin. So Iskalin is a kingdom that was built on and around what they call a dragon mount, functionally a volcano. And before the sort of like world-threatening event that happens in the main book in the series, we get, a hint at what is to come when the kingdom of Iskalin falls. The dragon that was sleeping in that dragon mount wakes up and it burns large parts of the kingdom to the ground and it takes possession of their king. And the book follows predominantly the princess of Iskalin, who is living in this castle as her father is possessed by this evil dragon and is desperately trying to protect her people and to find a way out of what we know is like a sort of doomed situation, which makes it so tragic and so painful to read, but in the best kind of way. One of the things I didn't expect and I really loved about this story was that the princess has a pretty overtly abusive relationship with her father. Her father likely had an abusive relationship to her mother, and now that it is just the princess, she is absolutely receiving that same kind of behavior from him. And so when he is possessed by the dragon, it is kind of the same pattern of behavior, just with a different enemy. And the sort of discussion around the dynamics of domestic abuse, I thought were handled really, really well in this book. We also had a point of view character who is a non-point of view character in the original book. And I so loved being in his head and to hear kind of his like perspective on what should have been his love story with the princess of Iskalin. And we have what's called a culler, somebody who goes and hunts down wormlings that aren't like full dragons, but that are like draconic creatures. So 3 very different perspectives in this kingdom. And the story was so thrilling. Like I really couldn't put it down. I think I listened to it in the course of like 2 days. So highly recommend. Okay, last in the sort of world of traditional fantasy is The Raven Scholar, which I read in January and February. It's another very large book. And it is a book that took the internet by storm last year. So I'm a tiny bit late to the game, but it absolutely delivered on all of the hype and praise that it had in the lead up to me picking it up. The Raven Scholar is another piece of like high fantasy. It is a world where people kind of pledge allegiance to different animal-based gods who share certain kinds of characteristics. And each like quarter of a century, all of the different representatives of those houses of the gods come together and compete for the throne of the emperor. It is a murder mystery story because somebody dies at that competition. It is a story about political struggle for power. It has tons of very innovative magic. And also romance, more romance than I was expecting, I think is fair to say. But this book was just so innovative. I could not put it down. Like every time you'd reach the end of a chapter, there would be some incredible reveal and you'd be like, what? I have to keep going. So even though it is a very big book, it did not feel like it. I think I always wanted to come back to it. I was always excited to find out what happens next. And if you're interested in more of my thoughts or more of my like real-time reactions, I have a vlog on the channel all about my experience reading this from cover to cover. I also do quite a bit of reading in the like historical romance genre, and I have one book in that genre to share with you from this quarter, which is A Single Thread of Moonlight. This is a book that actually is not new, but this is a new cover. It's by Laura Wood, and Laura Wood writes one of my favorite series. They're the Aviary books. First one is called An Agency of Scandal, I think. But these are like Regency lady spy books that are also romances. So the Aviary is a sort of private detective agency run by women for women. And in each of the books in the series, one of their spies kind of takes on a mission and somehow falls in love. There's such fun, truly. And this one, A Single Thread of Moonlight, was a book that was published before this series came out, and Laura Wood imagines it being in the same world, although it does not follow a member of the Aviary. I'm not even sure if it references the Aviary in any way, though there are some characters in this book who we later find out are members of the Aviary and are kind of connected to that world more concretely. But this is much more so a Cinderella story, which is so fun. I love a Cinderella retelling. In this case, our main character is a lady who runs away from home after her father dies at the sort of suspicious hands, potentially, of her stepmother. And so she runs away, she becomes a seamstress, and then a series of dramatic events lead her back to her home estate. And she is there in disguise at the behest of a charming lord, and all kinds of antics unfold from there. But we're following pretty classic Cinderella story beats. And what I will say about this book is that if you liked Bridgerton Season 4, you should read this book. It's the same kind of fun. It's the same kind of Cinderella retelling. It's also got like a masquerade ball. It's the same kind of setting. It's the same kind of class commentary. Like, if you want that story again but different, you should read A Single Thread of Moonlight. Tons of fun, such easy breezy reading, and it'll make you giggle, kick your feet. It's a whole lot of fun, and I highly recommend. I'm not much of a romantasy reader, but I do have a little bit of a fusion piece for you here. This probably could have gone in either fantasy or romance, but I thought I'd throw in a romantasy category here just for you now. And in that category, I read My Lady Jane, which was turned into a TV show. And I think I actually heard of it first through the TV show, but it is like a young adult, very like spunky, funny in tone story about Lady Jane Grey, who was Queen of England for 9 days. This is the sort of generation after Henry VIII and his 6 wives, if you sort of know that bit of Tudor history. And it sort of like reclaims that story and then puts a fantasy twist on it very unexpectedly, I think. It adds this element of animal shape-shifting quite unexpectedly. And I thought this book was a lot of fun. It's like a bit much, but I think it's trying to be a bit much. And it really delivers on like that sort of absurdist tone and is a good deal of fun. So as somebody who loves a wide range of Tudor retellings, and who loves a historical romance, who loves a bit of fantasy nonsense, this book was really great fusion. And then it meant that I got to go watch the TV show. Who doesn't love a little TV marathon? So it was worth it, honestly, just to then go watch the show and get to have the fun of comparing the two. And the audiobook has multiple narrators, which is always fun and like easier for picking up on who is where in the story. So I enjoyed the voice acting in the audiobook especially. A great cast overall. Another book that I didn't know what category to put it in. So I'm gonna call this the classics category, was A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I have had this tiny little copy for years of A Christmas Carol, and we have kept it in the little like box of Christmas decorations, and I like put it out every year, but I'd never read it. I've consumed many a sort of retelling of A Christmas Carol. We're big fans of A Muppet's Christmas Carol in this house. So we thought it would be nice to read the original, and you guys, it's really funny. Did you know A Christmas Carol was funny? I did not know that. It's super short. It does have that bit of like Old English difficulty to it, but it is so funny that it's fine. And it's so short that you'll be okay. You know what I mean? We just had an absolute blast reading this. Obviously, we didn't finish it in December, or this wouldn't be on my list, but I did finish it in early to mid-January. And it was really such a treat to read during the holiday season. And it's given me a real sort of newfound respect for Charles Dickens. You know, I'm not somebody who studied literature in any more formal way outside of whatever they make you read in high school. So I'm not particularly well acquainted with the classics, but I really enjoyed the writing style and tone of this text. And I'm hopeful to read other Charles Dickens work because of it. So, A Christmas Carol. You should pick it up. One of the other categories I was debating putting A Christmas Carol in is children's literature, because we've been reading a lot of it in my house recently. And in this quarter, we finished 2 more books in the Chronicles of Narnia series by the one and only C.S. Lewis. We have this beautiful bind up. It's got like gold foiling and a ribbon and such beautiful art on the cover. We got through The Horse and His Boy and Prince Caspian. So books 3 and 4 in chronological order. And reading these books has been such a hoot, because I really only know the world of Narnia through the movie, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. My husband Jake read all of the books as a child, and I kind of can't believe that I didn't read them. I guess I was too busy reading Harry Potter for like the 700th time. But I'm really enjoying picking these books up, and to be like reading more children's literature as a whole as of late. They're so absurd. And like some of them, frankly, I would not call particularly good, but because they are in Narnia and because there is such incredible like nostalgia and whimsy for that setting and for that story and for the Pevensey children, I am just like having a blast reading them. The Horse and His Boy is set predominantly outside of Narnia in one of the neighboring kingdoms. It's a very sort of like desert-like setting. And Prince Caspian, you may know from the movie, follows a far-flung future Narnia and the lives of a conquering king and his nephew, and kind of the reclaiming of Narnia by the animal people. So they are very fun. I recommend purely for the nostalgia. And many of them have been like unexpected and kind of dark. So it's been fun to flip through them. Okay, we are at the tail end of my list here. Just 2 graphic novels to share with you at the end. I finally read Garlic and the Vampire. Have you guys seen this story? There's 2 of them. There's Garlic and the Vampire and there's Garlic and the Witch. I haven't read Garlic and the Witch yet. But it's about this anxious little bulb of garlic who has to go defend her family from a vampire and be brave. I think it's so cute. And I was like not sure if it was going to be anything more than just cute when I picked it up, but it was everything I hoped it would be and more. It is absolutely precious, and I think everybody should read it. The art is phenomenal, and I got it from my library, delivered to my phone very quickly. It's the kind of thing you could sit down and read in an hour, but you will have an absolutely wonderful time the entire time you're reading it. The last is The Baker and the Bard, and this is like the perfect graphic novel for anybody who is a D&D lover, who is looking for like a little bit of queer, whimsical D&D like narrative. The art is beautiful. It's got this very like lovely pastel palette. We've got some interesting settings and a sweet relationship between the two main characters. And it's just about a baker and their bard who go on this very like unexpected adventure together. Easy, heartwarming. Not the best graphic novel I've ever read, but like a really solid one. And it was something that I would definitely recommend to anybody who in particular loves the D&D version of fantasy worlds. So there you have it. That is the 16 books that I read in the first quarter of the year, all wrapped up with a bow for you. I hope you found perhaps a new reading recommendation or two that you can add to your list for spring. And I will see you all soon in another video. Bye.